The Drask Empire was known across the galaxy as a ruthless and unyielding power. For centuries, they had crushed countless civilizations under their boot heel, expanding their dominion across star systems with terrifying speed. No one dared to challenge them, not in space, not in battle, and certainly not on their homeworld. The Drask fleet was the most feared in the universe, their warships towering monuments of destruction, armed with the deadliest weapons ever conceived. On a dark and quiet sector of space, the Drask Empire was celebrating another victory. They had just taken control of the Pyros system, a rich and resource-filled region of the galaxy. Their soldiers cheered, their warlords laughed, and their leaders took their thrones with smug satisfaction. It was a typical day for the Empire. Another conquest, another victory. The Empire's generals and commanders stood in the war room of their flagship, the Dreadhammer, staring at a vast holographic map of their territory. The Empire had grown so large that the map now stretched for light years, filled with conquered worlds, colonies, and ships. The Drask had no equal in space. To them, the universe was theirs to control. But as the commanders discussed their next campaign, something caught their attention. A small blip on the sensor grid. It was an anomaly, one that seemed completely insignificant, a single ship moving through their territory. At first, the officer on duty paid it no mind. It was probably a civilian ship or a scout from one of the lesser factions that dared to trespass in Drask space. Then, the ship grew closer, and closer, and closer. It didn't matter that the ship was small. It didn't matter that it was barely a fraction of the size of a Drask warship. What mattered was that it was intruding into the Empire's territory, moving without permission, and showing no sign of retreating. The Drask had no tolerance for such disrespect. Any ship that dared to enter their domain was destroyed on sight. That was the law of the galaxy. The Drask Empire ruled all. At first, the commanders laughed. "It's nothing," one said with a dismissive wave. "Probably just a merchant or some fool on a joyride. Let the scouts handle it." But as the ship continued its approach, something unsettling began to form in the back of their minds. The intruder wasn't changing course. It wasn't turning around or slowing down. It was heading straight for the heart of the Empire's territory. The sensors flickered, and a warning signal began to blare. The ship was not responding to hails. It wasn't even broadcasting a standard identification signal. "This is ridiculous," the lead commander muttered under his breath. "Send a squadron to intercept. A show of force should send them running." Without hesitation, a small fleet of Drask warships launched from the flagship. They were a mix of smaller attack vessels and support ships, each armed to the teeth with the Empire's advanced weaponry. Their mission was clear: destroy the intruder before it could reach any deeper into Drask space. The commander believed this would be a simple task. After all, who could stand against the might of the Empire? The ships moved quickly, cutting through the void of space, their engines roaring as they closed the distance. The intruder was still on course, heading straight toward them with a reckless disregard for their presence. The Drask fleet formed up in a defensive formation, preparing to fire at the slightest provocation. The moment came. The order was given, and the Drask fleet unleashed a barrage of laser fire, plasma blasts, and energy missiles. It was a well-coordinated strike, one that would vaporize most ships in an instant. The fleet's weapons lit up space in a dazzling display of destructive power. But the small intruder, this insignificant speck in the vastness of space, did not go down. Not only did it survive the initial wave of attacks, but it also returned fire with an intensity that left the Drask warships reeling. The first few blasts from the human ship's weapons were like nothing the Drask had ever encountered. The ship's shields absorbed the incoming fire effortlessly, while the return fire tore through the Drask ships with deadly precision. In an instant, one of the Drask warships exploded in a burst of light, debris scattering in all directions. The remaining ships tried to regroup, but the human ship moved with an agility that defied logic. It was fast, maneuverable, impossibly so. It darted in and out of their line of fire, striking with pinpoint accuracy and then vanishing before the Drask could retaliate. The commanders on the Dreadhammer watched in stunned silence as their ships fell one by one. They had underestimated this small vessel. They had thought it would be nothing more than a simple target, a pathetic excuse for a ship. They had never expected it to fight back, let alone fight back so fiercely. "This isn't possible," the lead commander muttered, disbelief in his voice. "How can one ship be so powerful? How is this happening?" As the battle raged on, more Drask ships were destroyed or disabled. The human warship, now identified as the Ares, was proving to be a nightmare for the Empire. It moved with the precision of a predator, and the Drask were helpless against its assault. The invincible Drask fleet was being dismantled by a single human warship. "What kind of weaponry do they have?" a scientist asked, fear creeping into his voice as he analyzed the data. "I don't know," the commander replied, his voice tight with frustration. "But we're going to find out." The Empire's arrogance had blinded them. They had seen no reason to fear anyone, certainly not a single ship, especially not one from a species they considered primitive. But now, as they watched their forces fall, they realized how wrong they were. The human warship was unlike anything they had ever encountered. The battle wasn't over, but the Drask were beginning to understand the gravity of the situation. This wasn't just an insignificant intrusion. This was a warning that the Empire had made a grave mistake. They had provoked humanity. And now, the consequences were unfolding before their eyes. It wasn't just a battle. It was a message. The galaxy would soon understand what the Drask Empire had learned the hard way. Never underestimate humanity. The Empire's arrogance had never been shaken, not even for a moment. They had conquered hundreds of worlds, wiped out entire species, and crushed every opposition that had dared to challenge them. But as the Drask fleet watched, their once invincible ships were now falling to a single human warship. The commanders aboard the Dreadhammer stood in shock, unable to believe what was happening right before their eyes. The human warship, the Ares, moved with unimaginable speed. It danced through the vastness of space, dodging their fire and launching attacks with deadly precision. The Drask had always prided themselves on their advanced weaponry, their ability to turn entire planets into rubble with a single shot. Yet here, in the heart of their empire, their most advanced ships were helpless. The Ares seemed to anticipate every move, as though it had access to knowledge of the Empire's strategies before they even began to execute them. The once unified Drask fleet began to fracture. Smaller ships tried to swarm the Ares, but it was too fast. One by one, their ships exploded into fireballs, their debris scattering in all directions. Even the most advanced Drask warships, their hulls reinforced by centuries of military innovation, could not withstand the relentless assault from the Ares. The Drask commanders struggled to regain control, issuing commands that were too late to save their ships. "Send more ships," one of the generals shouted, his voice trembling with panic. "We need to overwhelm it. Throw everything we have at it." But no matter how many ships they sent, it was never enough. The Ares would simply disappear into the darkness of space, only to reappear moments later to strike again, faster and harder than before. The human ship was relentless, moving in patterns that baffled the Drask sensors. As the battle dragged on, the once confident Drask leaders began to realize the full scale of their mistake. They had underestimated humanity. The humans weren't just primitive creatures with limited technology, as they had assumed. They were something much more dangerous. The Ares was proof of that. It was a ship unlike any the Drask had ever seen, its weapons far more advanced than anything in their arsenal. Yet it wasn't just the ship's technology that made it dangerous, it was the mind behind it. The human warship's captain, though unknown to the Drask, had already proven to be a master strategist. Every move was calculated, every strike was timed perfectly. The captain knew how to use the limited resources at their disposal to maximum effect. Every shot fired from the Ares was purposeful, every missile launched with precision. It wasn't just a ship, it was a symbol of humanity's ingenuity, their ability to adapt and overcome impossible odds. The Drask began to question their understanding of the universe. For centuries, they had crushed every civilization they encountered, convinced of their own superiority. But now, facing a single human ship, their entire worldview was crumbling. They could no longer rely on sheer numbers or brute force. This wasn't a battle that could be won by sending waves of ships into the fray. This was something new. As hours passed, the Drask fleet was in disarray. Their warships were scattered across the battlefield, struggling to coordinate their efforts, each ship trying to fend off the airs while avoiding the destruction that came with each strike. The once proud empire was on the brink of collapse, and yet the human showed no sign of slowing down. The Heirs wasn't just surviving, it was winning. The Drask commanders now faced a terrifying reality. They had to rethink everything they knew about war. For centuries, they had dominated with overwhelming force. But now, one ship was making a mockery of their strength. It was clear now that humanity was no longer the weak, insignificant species the Empire had once thought them to be. The humans had arrived with something more than just a powerful ship. They had arrived with a purpose. And that purpose was to challenge the Empire in ways they never could have predicted. The fear started to spread. It wasn't just about the loss of ships anymore. It was about what this meant for the Empire's future. If this human warship could inflict such damage, what would happen when humanity fully entered the galaxy's stage? The Drask had never faced an enemy like this before, and the realization that the humans had been holding back even more powerful weapons sent a chill down their spines. In the control room of the Dreadhammer, the mood had changed from disbelief to frantic desperation. The generals were now arguing, their voices rising in panic. One wanted to retreat, to regroup and strategize, while another insisted they needed to crush the human warship before it could escape. But deep down, they all knew the truth. No matter what they did, the Ares had already turned the tide of battle. It had proven to them that humanity wasn't to be underestimated. Even with their advanced technology and massive fleets, the Drask had become the hunted. Their once feared fleet was now the prey. It wasn't just about firepower anymore. It was about strategy, speed, and intelligence. The Drask had always relied on their sheer size and strength, but the human warship had proven that sometimes a single ship, powered by the right tactics and ingenuity, could shift the balance of power. The Ares continued its assault, never faltering, never hesitating. Every blast from its weapons sent another Drask warship to the depths of space, leaving nothing but debris in its wake. The Drask were losing, and they couldn't stop it. The once proud empire, so sure of its dominance, had underestimated humanity in the worst possible way. And now, they were paying the price. As the battle raged on, the last remaining Drask ships began to retreat, their once unified fleet dissolving into chaos. The human warship didn't chase them. It didn't need to. The damage had already been done. The Drask Empire was no longer the invincible force it once was, and humanity had only just begun to show them what it was capable of. In the aftermath, as the wreckage of Drask ships floated in space, the Empire was left to lick its wounds. The once untouchable power had been humbled by a single human warship, and the galaxy would never forget the day they learned that humanity was not just a species to be feared. It was a species that could change the galaxy forever. The aftermath of the battle left the galaxy reeling. The once dominant Drask Empire, known for its brutal conquests and crushing victories, had suffered an unimaginable blow at the hands of a single human warship. The victory of the Ares was not just about the destruction of Drask ships. It was the message it sent to the entire galaxy. Humanity was no longer the weak, insignificant species many had thought them to be. They were a force to be reckoned with. Across the galaxy, every civilization that had once viewed humanity as little more than an afterthought now found themselves reconsidering their perceptions. The Ares had defeated the mighty Drask fleet, and the message was clear. Humanity was no longer content to remain hidden on the fringes of the galaxy. The humans had arrived, and they had come to claim their place among the stars. But for the Drask Empire, the defeat was just the beginning of their troubles. As the shattered remnants of their fleet limped back to their homeworld, their leaders struggled to understand how such a thing had happened. The Drask had always believed they were unstoppable. No enemy, no force, could challenge them. Yet here they were, beaten by a species they had dismissed as primitive and weak. It was a wound to their pride that could never be healed. In the capital of the Drask Empire, the ruling council gathered in their grand hall, their faces grim. News of the loss had spread like wildfire, and the atmosphere was thick with fear and anger. Some members of the council argued for vengeance, for a counterattack to reclaim their lost honor. Others, more pragmatic, recognized the truth. Humanity wasn't going to back down. A counterattack might have worked against other species, but humanity was different. The Ares was proof of that. "We must send a message," one council member said, his voice cold with fury. "We cannot allow this humiliation to stand. If we don't act now, other species will think us weak." But another voice cut through the tension. A general who had been present at the battle stood up. His face was pale, his eyes filled with the remnants of disbelief. "Vengeance will not bring back our ships," he said quietly. "We have underestimated them. We thought their technology was primitive, their tactics unsophisticated. But they are not. The Ares, it's not just a warship, it's a symbol of something we cannot comprehend." The room fell silent. The general's words had struck a chord with many present. They had never seen an enemy like humanity before. They had always believed that their sheer power, their overwhelming numbers, would be enough to crush anything in their path. But the Ares had proven them wrong. The council deliberated for hours, but no solution seemed to present itself. The Drask Empire was in disarray. Their fleet had been decimated, their confidence shattered. Worse still, the fear had begun to spread beyond the Drask. Other species, once eager to ally with the Empire, now hesitated. They saw the power of humanity, and they feared it. Meanwhile, on Earth, humanity's leaders were beginning to realize the magnitude of what had just occurred. The Ares was no longer just a symbol of human strength. It was a call to action. The warship had not only crushed the Drask fleet, it had broadcasted a message to the galaxy. Humanity was ready to claim its place among the stars. Back aboard the Ares, Captain Alexandria, the woman who had led the charge against the Drask, stood on the bridge, staring out into the vastness of space. Her hands rested on the console in front of her, and her mind raced with the implications of what they had just done. They had won, yes, but that victory had come with a cost. Humanity had stepped into the spotlight, and there was no turning back. "We've made our mark," she said to her officers, her voice calm but heavy with responsibility. "But this is only the beginning. The galaxy will be watching, and we will need to be prepared for what comes next." Her officers nodded in agreement. The victory over the Drask was momentous, but they knew it wouldn't be long before others would come. Other empires, other fleets would test humanity's resolve. But Captain Alexandria was confident. Humanity had been underestimated for too long, and now it was time to show the galaxy exactly what they were capable of. In the months that followed, the story of the Ares victory spread across the galaxy. The Drask Empire, once feared and unstoppable, was now in retreat, nursing its wounds, and every species that had ever doubted humanity began to look at them with a new sense of wariness. The galaxy had learned that humanity was not to be trifled with. As for the Drask, they knew that they couldn't just retreat into the shadows and forget about the Ares. The human warship had exposed their weakness, and that was something they could not allow to stand. Their pride had been crushed, and their fear of humanity's power had only grown. There was no question in their minds now. They would be back. But the next time they faced humanity, they would be ready. And so would the humans. The warship Ares had become a symbol, not just of humanity's strength, but of their resilience. It was a message to the galaxy. Humanity might have been small and isolated once, but now they were here to stay. They had answered the call, and the galaxy would never forget the day a single human warship had torn apart the might of an empire. As the Ares continued its journey through the stars, humanity looked forward to the future with both hope and determination. The galaxy had been shaken, and the humans were ready for whatever came next. The first victory was theirs, but it was only the beginning. The battle for the galaxy was far from over, and humanity would not rest until they had secured their place among the stars. As the days passed since the battle with the Drask Empire, the entire galaxy remained on edge. The first shockwave of humanity's strength had been felt far and wide, and no one could predict what would happen next. For the Drask, the damage to their empire was more than just physical. It was deeply psychological. Their once indomitable reputation had been shattered by a force they had barely understood. The world had changed overnight, and now, as the survivors of their fleet limped back to their homeworld, the Drask Empire faced a crisis that no one had prepared for. But the humans weren't celebrating. Captain Alexandria and her crew aboard the Ares knew that the victory over the Drask Empire had just been the first chapter in a much larger, more complex story. The galaxy wasn't simply going to roll over in the face of a single victory. No, the Drask Empire was only one piece of the puzzle. Other forces would rise, others would test humanity's resolve, and the humans needed to be ready. The crew of the Ares gathered in the war room. The cold, sterile atmosphere of the ship was now filled with an air of tension. Despite the victory, no one was naive enough to believe that their enemies would simply give up. Everyone knew that the real battle had just begun. "We need to take this opportunity to show the galaxy that this wasn't a fluke," Captain Alexandria stated, her voice sharp with authority. "Our victory against the Drask has sent a message, but now we must prepare for the fallout. The galaxy will come to us. They'll either want to fight us or join us, but they will come." Lieutenant Royce, a seasoned officer with years of combat experience, nodded in agreement. The Drask were just one empire. There are hundreds more out there, each with their own ambitions. Some may want revenge for the Drask, while others might see us as an ally. Either way, we can't afford to be caught off guard again. Alexandria glanced around the room, meeting the eyes of her officers. "Exactly. And we need to prepare for the worst. We've shown them our strength, but we must show them our resolve. We must be ready for any challenge, any enemy that decides to make us their target." The crew members, though shaken by the gravity of the situation, nodded in unison. They were a part of something much larger now. No longer just humans fighting for survival on their homeworld. They were becoming players on the galactic stage, and that came with both enormous responsibility and peril. Back in the galactic capital, the other empires watched closely. Some were still in disbelief that humanity could achieve such a victory, but many had already started making plans, formulating responses, and looking for weaknesses to exploit. The arrogance of the galaxy's dominant powers had been shaken, but that didn't mean they would simply fold. The Zarnak Empire, a ruthless and technologically advanced civilization, was one of the first to take notice. They had long seen themselves as the true rulers of the galaxy, and the Ares victory had stirred something deep within their leadership. Their empire had crushed countless worlds, and they prided themselves on their military superiority. Now, however, there was a new player, and they had to be dealt with before humanity could gain a foothold in the galaxy. In the dark halls of the Zarnak War Council, the Emperor's voice was cold as he addressed his advisors. "We cannot allow these humans to grow in power. If they can defeat the Drask, they can defeat us. Send word to the fleet. We move against humanity before they become a threat." A quiet murmur spread through the room as the advisors processed his words. But the Emperor's mind was made up. The galaxy had always been ruled by fear, and the Zarnak Empire would make sure that fear was directed toward humanity. They would stop them before they could grow too strong, and if that meant crushing their fledgling power in its infancy, then so be it. Meanwhile, The humans on the Eras had already started making plans of their own. The victory over the Drask had proven their strength, but they needed more than just military power to maintain their position in the galaxy. They needed allies. They needed to forge relationships with the other civilizations, but those relationships would have to be built on strength and mutual respect. Humanity would never let itself be bullied or manipulated. They would show the galaxy that they were more than capable of standing tall in the face of any challenge. The next step is diplomacy, Captain Alexandria said as the crew of the Eras prepared for their next move. We've shown them our strength, but now we need to build alliances. Some of the species out there might see us as a threat, but others might see us as a partner. Our task is to find those who are willing to work with us and create a network of allies strong enough to face the Zarnak and anyone else who might think they can challenge us. Lieutenant Royce, ever the realist, raised an eyebrow. And what about the Zarnak? They've already started mobilizing. They won't be content to sit by and wait for us to get our act together. Alexandria met his gaze. We'll be ready. The Eras will take the lead, but we'll need to build our fleet, recruit more forces, and form alliances. The Zarnak think they can intimidate us, but they have no idea what they're up against. We're not just humans anymore. We're a force, and we'll show them that. As the Eras moved through the stars, humanity's resolve grew stronger with every passing day. They had fought for survival, for their place in the galaxy, and they had won. But now, they were preparing for something much larger. The galaxy had underestimated them once, and they wouldn't make that mistake again. The Zarnak Empire would soon learn that humanity was not a species to be ignored or underestimated. The battle for the galaxy had just begun, and humanity was ready to take its place as one of the most powerful forces in the universe. The question was not whether they would survive. It was whether the galaxy was ready for what humanity had to offer. And that answer would come soon enough. The galaxy was a vast, untamed expanse, filled with wonders and dangers. But now, something had changed. A human warship, the Eras, had shattered the peace the galaxy's empires had taken for granted. The Drask Empire was still reeling from the blow it had received. Yet that was only the beginning. As the humans prepared for what was to come, the other empires began to take notice. The Zarnak Empire, once confident in their dominance, had already set their sights on the humans. But this wasn't just about military might. It was a battle for the future of the galaxy itself. As the Eras continued to patrol the outer reaches of the galaxy, Captain Alexandria and her crew had already begun the difficult task of securing alliances with the various species and factions who had witnessed humanity's unexpected victory. They had no illusions about what was to come. The Zarnak Empire, still smarting from their loss, was already preparing for a retaliation. They were determined to show the galaxy that they would not tolerate any challenge to their authority. And they weren't the only ones who would take issue with humanity's rise. The crew of the Eras knew they couldn't face the galaxy alone. They needed allies, and not just any allies, strong, reliable ones. So Alexandria set out on a mission to form a coalition of species that would stand with humanity in the coming storm. She knew that every decision she made now would shape humanity's future. If they could build a united front, they might stand a chance. But if they failed, the galaxy's most powerful empires would crush them before they ever had a chance to build a lasting legacy. Meanwhile, back at the Zarnak Empire's capital, the Emperor had received troubling news. His intelligence networks had reported the swift mobilization of fleets, and the Drask Empire was already plotting its revenge. The Emperor's thoughts were dark as he stood at the window of his palace, looking out over his capital. The Drask had been humiliated by the humans, and now they were calling on their allies for support. The Zarnak knew that in order to crush humanity, they needed to act quickly, decisively, and ruthlessly. Our empire has withstood the test of time, and it will continue to do so, the Emperor said to his council of advisors. But this human species is a wild card. They've already proven they're capable of far more than we expected. We must eliminate them before they gain any more power. Their growing alliances could be our undoing. One of the advisors, an older and wiser figure named General Malrith, spoke up. But sire, the humans have proven themselves formidable. Perhaps it is time to reconsider. They may not be the threat we initially thought. The Emperor glared at Malrith. Reconsider? No. We will not allow humanity to challenge the supremacy of the Zarnak Empire. If they must be eradicated, then so be it. The council nodded in agreement, and preparations for war began in earnest. The Zarnak would strike first, hoping to take humanity off guard before they had a chance to form their alliances and strengthen their defenses. On the other side of the galaxy, Captain Alexandria knew the storm was coming. The Ares had received reports that the Zarnak fleet was mobilizing, and the warships would be on the move within weeks. But she wasn't about to stand still and wait for the inevitable. She ordered her crew to increase their efforts to reach out to potential allies, especially those who had been in conflict with the Zarnak. Humanity, despite its relatively small presence in the galaxy, had made a name for itself. In a matter of months, the Ares had become a symbol of human strength. But strength alone wasn't enough. Alexandria needed more. They needed trust, strategy, and a network of allies who could be counted on in the coming fight. She ordered her officers to focus on securing the support of key factions, including the enigmatic Valari, a peaceful yet powerful race of telepaths, and the Nyrath, a warrior species who had long been enemies of the Zarnak. The first of these talks came with the Valari, a species known for their intelligence and their ability to manipulate minds. They weren't naturally inclined to violence, but they understood the need for survival in a galaxy that valued strength above all else. Alexandria met with their leader, a dignified figure named Sorrel. He was cautious, but intrigued by humanity's sudden rise. "You've caught the attention of the galaxy," Sorrel said, his voice calm and measured. "But our alliance is not given lightly. Your victory against the Drask Empire was impressive, but it was a singular event. Prove to us that you will not falter in the face of greater challenges." Alexandria nodded, understanding the weight of the request. "We are not just a fluke. We are here to stay, and we will fight for our place in the galaxy. The Zarnak will come for us, and we need you to stand with us when that day arrives." Sorrel studied her for a moment before responding. "I will speak with my council, but know this, Captain. The Valari are not a race to be used. We do not fight for conquest. If we ally with you, it is because we believe you are worthy of standing beside us. Prove your strength, and we will join you." The conversation ended, and Alexandria knew that this was just the beginning. The Valari might not be quick to join the fight, but their support could be invaluable in the days to come. With the Nyrath, the Valari, and a few other races that had shown interest in humanity's cause, Alexandria was beginning to feel the weight of responsibility. If they could unite these factions, humanity could stand strong against the might of the Zarnak. But the Zarnak were not idle. As the Ares continued its diplomatic efforts, the empire of the Zarnak readied its fleet for an assault that would change the course of the galaxy forever. The stakes were higher than ever, and both sides knew that only one could emerge victorious. Humanity's survival and the galaxy's future hung in the balance. Captain Alexandria stood on the bridge of the Ares, looking out into the stars, the weight of the galaxy pressing down on her. She could feel the tension in the air, the inevitability of what was coming. Humanity had already proven it could win a battle. Now, they would have to prove they could win a war, and she would lead them through it, no matter the cost. The galaxy stood at the edge of a precipice. The alliance that Captain Alexandria had carefully crafted was fragile, held together by the shared hope that humanity could be the catalyst for change. But the Zarnak Empire was closing in, their fleets ready to strike at any moment. Alexandria and her crew aboard the Ares could feel the storm building. The diplomatic efforts were over, and now the only thing left was the coming battle. It wasn't just about military power anymore. The stakes had grown beyond a simple conflict. This was about the very survival of humanity and the preservation of a delicate balance in the galaxy. Alexandria knew that her actions in the coming days would shape not only the future of the human race, but the fate of every species that had chosen to stand beside them. The weight of it all pressed down on her, but she refused to falter. She had seen what humanity was capable of. She had seen them rise against impossible odds. And now, they would have to do it again. The Ares moved through the void, its engines humming with anticipation. Alexandria stood on the bridge, her eyes fixed on the holographic display that showed the current positions of the various fleets. She had spoken to her allies, briefed them on the plan, and now it was time to see if they were truly ready to face what was coming. Her thoughts flickered back to the Valari, who had agreed to stand with them, and the Nyrath, whose warriors had pledged to fight alongside humanity. These species, once wary of humanity's presence, had seen what the humans were capable of and decided to trust them. But trust could only take them so far. Now they had to prove it on the battlefield. As Alexandria studied the star map, her communications officer, Lieutenant Fisk, approached. "Captain, we've received a transmission from the Zarnak Empire. They're demanding our surrender. They've given us a 24-hour window to comply, or they will initiate a full-scale assault." Alexandria's lips tightened. The Zarnak had always been ruthless, but this was the first time they had issued such a direct ultimatum. The entire galaxy knew what this meant. If the Zarnak were threatening humanity, they were prepared to destroy everything in their path to assert their dominance. It was clear that they viewed humanity's rise as a threat to the entire power structure they had spent centuries building. They wouldn't let this challenge go unanswered. "They want us to surrender," Fisk repeated. "They're demanding the humans retreat and submit to Zarnak rule. If we don't comply, they'll wipe us out." Alexandria's jaw clenched. "Tell them we will not surrender. We will fight to the last ship, to the last breath, if that's what it takes." Fisk hesitated. "Captain, we don't know what we're up against. The Zarnak fleet is massive. They have numbers, firepower. They're one of the largest empires in the galaxy." "I know," Alexandria said, turning to face him. "But we can't back down now. Not after everything we fought for. Not after everything humanity has proven." She paused, letting the words sink in. "We've already faced worse. The Drask thought they could destroy us, and we beat them. The galaxy thought we were nothing more than a fluke, and now they know better. The Zarnak will learn the same lesson. Humanity will not be crushed." Fisk nodded, his expression determined. "Understood, Captain." Alexandria turned back to the holographic display. The Zarnak fleet was vast, over 500 ships, each one brimming with weapons and advanced technology. But what they lacked was the resolve that humanity had. The Zarnak had ruled the galaxy for so long that they had forgotten what it was like to fight for survival. They relied on their overwhelming power to crush opposition, never imagining that someone could stand against them. But humanity had proven them wrong. The Ares wasn't just a warship. It was a symbol. A single ship, a testament to human ingenuity and determination, had struck fear into the hearts of the galaxy's most powerful empires. And now humanity would fight, not for conquest, but for survival. Alexandria's voice rang out across the bridge, steady and calm. "All hands, prepare for battle. We'll show them what humanity can do when it's backed into a corner." The crew responded with a chorus of affirmations. There was no fear in their voices, just resolve. They had seen what the Zarnak were capable of, and they knew the odds they were up against. But they also knew one thing: humanity never gave up. No matter the cost, no matter the odds, humanity would fight. The countdown began. As the seconds ticked away, Alexandria's mind raced. She thought of the allies they had gathered, the people who had put their trust in humanity's strength. She thought of the galaxy they were fighting to protect, the stars, the planets, the species that depended on peace. This wasn't just about one human warship against an empire. This was about a turning point in the history of the galaxy, a battle that would define the future. The Zarnak fleet would not be merciful, but Alexandria was ready. She had no illusions about the challenges ahead. But she had one thing the Zarnak didn't: humanity's will to survive. "Captain," Fisk interrupted, his voice urgent. "The Zarnak have begun to move. Their lead ships are advancing towards our position." Alexandria nodded, her gaze fixed on the screen. "All ships, prepare to engage. We'll give them a fight they'll never forget." The crew moved quickly, preparing for the imminent battle. Every officer was in their place, every system online and ready. The hum of the engines seemed to resonate through the ship, and Alexandria could feel the energy in the air, the electricity of anticipation. This was it, the moment humanity had been waiting for. The first Zarnak warship came into view, massive and imposing, its weapons aimed directly at the Ares. The battle was about to begin. "Fire," Alexandria commanded. The first shot rang out, the Ares unleashing a torrent of energy into the Zarnak fleet. The war had begun. And this time, humanity wasn't backing down. The battle raged on across the stars. The Ares, with its crew of skilled humans and allies, fought fiercely against the overwhelming might of the Zarnak Empire. The human warship, though vastly outnumbered, moved like a shadow in the vastness of space, unpredictable and relentless. Alexandria stood at the bridge, watching the chaos unfold. She knew the stakes, and every decision she made would determine the fate of the galaxy. The Zarnak fleet had underestimated humanity's resolve. Their ships were larger, their weapons more advanced, but the humans fought with a passion that couldn't be matched. The Ares danced through the void, dodging enemy fire and returning shots with deadly precision. It was clear that the Zarnak had not anticipated such a fierce resistance. They thought humanity was just a fleeting threat, something that could be crushed under the heel of their empire. But they were wrong. "Captain," Lieutenant Fisk's voice cut through the chaos. "We've managed to breach their outer defenses, but their flagship is still holding strong at the center of their fleet. We need to take it out if we want to break their command structure." Alexandria's eyes narrowed as she studied the enemy formation. The Zarnak flagship, a colossal warship bristling with weapons and shields, was at the heart of their fleet. If they could destroy it, the rest of the Zarnak forces would be thrown into disarray. But getting close enough to strike would be a dangerous gamble. Their firepower was overwhelming. "Prepare the fleet to concentrate fire on the flagship," she ordered, her voice calm but firm. "We'll hit them with everything we've got. All ships, focus your fire on that target." The crew responded swiftly, their training kicking in as they worked in unison. The human fleet, though outnumbered, was relentless. The ships fired in synchronized waves, their weapons cutting through the void like a storm. The Ares led the charge, its weapons blazing as it moved closer to the heart of the battle. As they neared the flagship, the Zarnak fired their most powerful weapon, a massive energy beam that ripped through the space in front of the Ares. The ship rocked under the sheer force of the blast, alarms blaring across the bridge. But Alexandria didn't flinch. She gripped the arm of her chair and steadied herself. "Damage report," she shouted. "We've taken a hit to the starboard side, Captain," came the reply. "Hull integrity holding. We've lost some systems, but nothing critical yet." Alexandria nodded. "Good. Stay focused. Keep pushing forward." The Ares surged forward, weaving between enemy fire as it closed the gap with the flagship. The crew worked in unison, firing back with everything they had, targeting weak points in the enemy's shields. The Zarnak flagship, though formidable, wasn't invincible. Every hit they landed chipped away at its defenses, weakening it slowly but surely. "Captain," Lieutenant Fisk called out again. "We've found a vulnerability in their shield matrix. A single strike could take it down." Alexandria's heart raced as she processed the information. This was it, the one chance they had to break the Zarnak's dominance. "Get a targeting lock on that spot," she ordered. "Full power to the forward weapons. We're going to end this now. The Ares powered forward, its weapons charging. The Zarnak flagship loomed larger on the screen, its massive guns preparing for another devastating strike. But Alexandria wasn't about to let that happen. She waited, her finger hovering over the command button. "Fire," she commanded. The Ares unleashed its final salvo, a concentrated blast of energy that hit the vulnerable point on the Zarnak flagship. The explosion was catastrophic. The flagship's shields failed, and the ship exploded in a blinding flash of light. The shockwave rocked the battlefield, and the Zarnak fleet faltered, their command structure shattered. For a brief moment, there was silence in space. The human fleet had dealt a devastating blow to the Zarnak Empire, and their ships began to retreat. The remaining Zarnak forces, leaderless and in disarray, turned and fled, unable to face the fury of humanity. Alexandria watched in disbelief as the Zarnak fleet retreated, their once proud ships scattering across the stars. The Ares had done it. Humanity had done it. Against all odds, they had taken down one of the most powerful empires the galaxy had ever known. "Captain," Fisk's voice broke through the quiet. "It's over. The Zarnak are retreating." A cheer erupted across the bridge as the crew realized what had just happened. They had won. Against all odds, humanity had triumphed over the Zarnak Empire. Alexandria's face softened, a smile tugging at the corner of her lips. But she didn't let herself get lost in the victory. There was still work to do. The galaxy was still in turmoil, and humanity had earned a place among the stars. But the war wasn't truly over yet. The Zarnak would regroup, and other threats would rise in their place. But for now, Alexandria allowed herself a moment to savor the victory. Humanity had shown the galaxy that they would not be subjugated. They had fought for their survival, for their freedom, and they had won. The universe had witnessed the strength of humanity, and it would never forget. "Set a course for the homeworld," Alexandria said, her voice steady once again. "It's time to rebuild. And next time, we won't just survive. We will thrive." The Ares turned towards Earth, and the crew prepared for the journey home. The galaxy had been shaken by humanity's power, and the future was theirs to shape. The alien diplomat Vethok stepped off his sleek, silver spacecraft onto the landing platform of Earth's United Nations headquarters. His reptilian features remained still, unreadable, as he scanned the humans gathered before him. Tall, broad-shouldered military officers stood in stiff formation, their expressions calm yet firm. Government officials stood behind them, their faces a mix of curiosity and skepticism. Vethok had visited countless worlds, negotiated countless treaties, and witnessed countless species boast of their strength. But never before had he encountered a race as puzzling as humans. Vethok's species, the Zorthan, were among the most powerful in the galaxy. Their empire had spanned thousands of systems for centuries, their military feared across the stars. And yet, here stood a primitive species from a single planet, acting as if they were equals. He found it amusing, even ridiculous. He had studied their history, their technology, their wars. They were aggressive, yes, but against the might of a true galactic power, they were nothing more than children wielding sticks. A human general, an older man with sharp blue eyes and silver hair, stepped forward. His uniform was crisp, his posture unshaken. General Keller extended a hand. "Ambassador Vethok, welcome to Earth." Vethok glanced at the extended hand, but did not take it. Zorthans did not believe in such unnecessary gestures. Instead, he gave a slight nod, his dark yellow eyes narrowing. "General Keller, I appreciate the welcome, though I must admit I find it intriguing that your leaders insisted I visit personally." Keller smirked, retracting his hand. "We figured you'd want to see things for yourself. After all, the Galactic Council has been questioning our military capabilities." Vethok let out a low huff, a sound similar to a chuckle. "Questioning would be an understatement. Your species is young. You've barely begun space travel beyond your system. And yet, I hear whispers that humanity claims to be capable of defending itself against an invasion. He took a step closer, his towering form casting a shadow over the human general. I find that difficult to believe. Keller didn't flinch. That's why we invited you here. You'll see firsthand what humanity is capable of. Vethok's expression remained neutral, but inside, he was amused. He had attended many such demonstrations before. Lesser species always tried to impress, hoping to prove they were stronger than they truly were. But in the end, numbers and firepower always dictated power, and the Zorthan Empire had both. The humans led him into a secure facility deep beneath the UN headquarters. As they moved through the halls, he noted the efficiency of their security. There were armed guards at every checkpoint, scanning every individual who passed. Their weapons were compact, less advanced than Zorthan energy rifles, but well-maintained. These were not the actions of a species that underestimated threats. The doors opened into a large viewing chamber, its walls made of reinforced glass. Beyond it lay an enormous hangar, and in the center sat a single spacecraft. Vethok tilted his head slightly. The ship looked unimpressive. It was smaller than Zorthan cruisers, its design sleek but simple. There were no visible weapons, no massive energy signatures indicating advanced technology. It was underwhelming. This, Keller said, gesturing toward the ship, is the UNSF Aegis, one of our latest developments. Vethok let out a soft scoff. It appears modest. Keller grinned. Looks can be deceiving. A voice crackled over the intercom, confirming launch preparations were complete. The massive hangar doors above began to slide open, revealing the dark expanse of space beyond. The Aegis lifted off, its thrusters humming with a soft energy pulse. Vethok folded his arms, unimpressed. "And what exactly am I meant to be witnessing?" he asked. Keller didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pressed a button on the control panel before him. A holographic display flickered to life, showing an asteroid field positioned several thousand kilometers away. "We set up a test for you. See that field? It's composed of dense rock and metal fragments, the kind that would normally require heavy artillery to clear." Vethok nodded slowly. "Yes, and..." Keller's smirk widened. "Watch." A command was given, and the Aegis activated. There was no visible sign of weapons deploying, no external turrets shifting into position. Yet, within seconds, a brilliant beam of energy shot forth from the ship, a thin, almost imperceptible streak of light. The moment it struck the asteroid field, the entire mass of rock and metal disintegrated. Not shattered, not broken, reduced to nothing. Vethok's eyes widened slightly. He had expected a missile barrage, perhaps an energy cannon that would leave debris in its wake. But this was something else. The asteroid field had been there one moment and gone the next. No residual explosions, no trace of destruction. Just emptiness. He turned to Keller, his voice measured but firm. "What was that?" Keller clasped his hands behind his back. "That was a fraction of the Aegis's power." Vethok narrowed his eyes. "A fraction." Keller nodded. 10%, to be exact. For the first time since his arrival, Vethok felt a twinge of unease. This was impossible. No known species had weaponry capable of that kind of precision and efficiency. Even the Zorthans, with all their advancements, relied on brute force, overwhelming their enemies with superior numbers and firepower. But this was something different, something dangerous. He forced his composure to remain intact. "A fascinating display," he said carefully, "but a single ship does not win wars. The Zorthan Empire commands fleets that could reduce your planet to ashes." Keller's smirk didn't fade. "Perhaps, but that's the problem with empires like yours. You think war is about numbers, about how many ships you can throw at an enemy." He gestured toward the screen, where the Aegis had begun its return flight. "Humanity doesn't believe in wasting resources. We believe in efficiency, in innovation." Vethok studied the general's expression. He had seen many species try to bluff their way into looking stronger than they were. But Keller, he wasn't bluffing. There was something about the way he spoke, the confidence in his words, that sent a chill down Vethok's spine. The intercom crackled again. A second test was ready. This time, a series of automated war drones were released into space, their weapon systems primed. Vethok watched as the Aegis once again activated, but instead of firing, the ship vanished. Not cloaked, not hidden, gone. A moment later, explosions erupted among the drones. They were destroyed before they could even react, their remains scattering into the void. Then, just as suddenly, the Aegis reappeared in its original position. Vethok clenched his jaw. Impossible. Keller chuckled. Quantum displacement drive. It doesn't just cloak the ship, it moves it outside of standard space. Vethok's mind raced. He had studied the most advanced galactic technologies, and nothing came close to what he had just witnessed. If this was real, if humans truly possessed this kind of weaponry, then the Zorthan Empire had made a terrible mistake in underestimating them. He turned to Keller, his voice lower now. "What do you plan to do with this power?" Keller's smirk faded. His expression grew serious. "We don't seek war, Ambassador, but if someone brings war to us, we'll make sure they regret it." Vethok stared at the human general, and for the first time in his long career, he felt something new. Fear. Vethok sat in silence aboard his personal shuttle, staring at the void of space outside his window. His mind replayed the demonstration over and over again, the way the Aegis had erased the asteroid field, how it had destroyed war drones without even being seen. It defied all logic, all known technology. And yet the humans had done it right in front of him. He had come to Earth expecting arrogance, expecting a species that overestimated itself. Instead, he had found something far worse, a species that had been underestimated. As the shuttle made its way back to the Zorthan command vessel, Vethok accessed a private communication channel. The screen flickered to life, and a stern, battle-scarred Zorthan appeared. Grand Strategist Ulker, one of the highest-ranking officials in the Empire. His sharp, predatory eyes locked onto Vethok's. "Ambassador," Ulker greeted, his voice gruff. "I assume your mission was a success." Vethok hesitated for only a second before choosing his words carefully. "That depends on how you define success." Ulker's eyes narrowed. "Explain." Vethok leaned forward. "The humans are not what we expected. They possess weaponry beyond anything in the Council's records. Their technology is—" He paused, searching for the right word. "Unnatural." Ulker scoffed. "No species develops weapons beyond our understanding. Are they using stolen technology? Perhaps another empire is aiding them in secret." Vethok shook his head. "No. I saw it myself. They built these weapons on their own. And strategist." He took a slow breath. "If they wanted to, they could wipe out fleets before they even saw the enemy coming." Ulker's face hardened. "That is a bold claim, Ambassador." Vethok's voice remained steady. "A claim I would not make unless I were certain. The humans are not to be underestimated." Ulker's expression darkened, and he leaned back, folding his arms. "That is concerning." A pause. Then his eyes flickered with something dangerous. "Perhaps it is time we tested them further." Vethok felt a knot tighten in his chest. "You mean war?" Ulker sneered. "Not war, Ambassador. A test. We will apply pressure and see how humanity reacts. If they are truly as dangerous as you claim, then we must assess their weaknesses before they become a threat." Vethok clenched his jaw. He had seen the way humans spoke about war, the way General Keller had looked at him. Humanity didn't just fight with brute strength. They fought with ingenuity, unpredictability. And when they fought to win. "Strategist," Vethok said carefully, "I strongly advise against provoking them." Ulker's lips curled in amusement. "Noted, Ambassador, but the decision has already been made." The screen went dark. Vethok exhaled slowly, staring at his own reflection in the glass. He had just delivered a warning. The Empire had chosen to ignore it. And deep inside, for the first time in his life, Vethok felt the cold grip of fear. The Zorthan fleet moved into position near the Sol system, just beyond the reach of Earth's long-range sensors. Silent, invisible to human detection, they waited for orders. It was not an invasion. At least not yet. Grand Strategist Ulker had made it clear. This was a test. A way to see how humanity would react when they realized they were being watched. Vethok stood on the bridge of the Zorthan command vessel, his arms clasped behind his back, as he watched the display. The humans had no idea they were here. Their ships patrolled their usual routes. Their defenses remained unmoved. And yet, Vethok could not shake the unease growing inside him. He had sent his report. He had warned them. And now, they were about to make a mistake. Status. Ulker's voice cut through the silence, sharp and commanding. Observation units are in place. A Zorthan officer replied. We are monitoring all human fleet movements. They are unaware of our presence. Ulker smirked. Good. Let's see how long that lasts. Vethok finally turned to face him. Strategist, I must once again advise caution. Humanity's strength is not in their numbers, but in their ability to respond. If they detect us. Ulker waved a hand dismissively. That is the point, Ambassador. We want them to detect us. A cornered animal shows its true nature when threatened. Vethok's jaw tightened. This was not a test. It was provocation. The humans had not made a move against the Zorthan Empire, and yet here they were, encroaching upon their borders like a predator circling prey. He watched the fleet's movements carefully. A dozen cloaked reconnaissance ships spread throughout the system, gathering intelligence. Their orders were simple. Get close, scan human defenses, and retreat before they could be detected. It should have been easy. And then, Commander. A Zorthan officer's voice rose with sudden alarm. We have a problem. Ulker turned, his smirk fading. Explain. One of our reconnaissance ships. It's gone. Silence filled the bridge. Vethok frowned. Gone. The officer's scales darkened in unease. It vanished from our sensors. No distress signal, no trace of destruction. It was there one moment, and then it wasn't. Ulker's expression hardened. That's impossible. Were they detected? We don't know, the officer admitted. There was no sign of human activity near them. Ulker turned to Vethok. What do you know of this? Vethok shook his head. I warned you, strategist. Humanity does not fight conventionally. If they detected your ship, then they already know you're here. Ulker's nostrils flared. He refused to believe that a lesser species could remove a Zorthan vessel without a trace. And yet, another alarm sounded. Sir, another ship, gone. The bridge fell into stunned silence. Ulker stepped forward, traced the last known positions. Were there any energy readings, any distortions? The officer worked quickly, scanning the records. A moment later, he stiffened. There was something. A faint fluctuation in local space, almost like. His voice trailed off, uncertainty in his tone. Like what? Ulker demanded. The officer hesitated. Like a hole in reality. Vethok felt the cold grip of fear settle into his bones. He knew exactly what that meant. He had seen it before, during the demonstration on Earth. Quantum displacement. The humans weren't just watching. They were here. Strategist, Vethok said slowly, his voice tight. We need to leave. Ulker sneered. Leave? We haven't even begun our. Another alert. Sir, 3 more ships are gone. Panic rippled through the bridge. This wasn't an attack. It was something far worse. The humans weren't engaging them in a battle. They were hunting them. Ulker's face darkened. His arrogance faltered. Pull back the remaining ships. Too late, the officer shouted. Somethings. The command vessel shook violently. Lights flickered. Warning sirens blared. The entire ship lurched as if something enormous had just grabbed it. Vethok's claws dug into the console as he steadied himself. He looked out the viewport and felt his stomach drop. Something was out there, something they couldn't see. And then, a voice crackled over the comms, a voice that did not belong to any Zorthan. It was human. "You should have listened to your ambassador." The line cut, and then the Zorthan flagship vanished into nothingness. Vethok's claws dug into the console, his heart racing as the empty void outside seemed to mock his helplessness. His mind struggled to process what had just happened. The flagship, the mighty vessel of the Zorthan Empire, had been there one moment, and then gone. It had vanished without a trace. No debris, no signs of destruction, just nothing. "Report." Ulker's voice cut through the chaos, loud and furious. The bridge crew scrambled, trying to regain control, but every station flashed warnings, systems failing, the ship's systems rebooting, communications lost. A sense of dread thickened the air like a choking fog. Vethok turned to face Ulker, but his eyes were focused on the same view. The endless stretch of stars that now felt far more like an abyss than a calm sea of light. He couldn't see it, but he could feel it. Whatever the humans had unleashed, whatever this force was, it was here. Ulker's voice was strained. "What's happening? Why aren't we moving?" "The engines, they're not responding," an officer reported, panic edging his voice. "We're stuck. We can't." The ship rocked again, even harder this time, and several Zorthan officers were thrown from their stations, crashing to the ground. The room went dim as power fluctuated, emergency lights casting eerie red glows across the bridge. Vethok's gaze snapped to the view screen, where the stars flickered like distant flames. He had heard stories of weapons that could manipulate space itself, bend reality, rip apart the fabric of the universe, but he had never believed them. Not until now. He had always assumed that such things were reserved for the myths of ancient species, things long gone and forgotten. But the humans had done it. "Strategist," Vethok said, his voice low, almost breathless. "We are being hunted." Ulker's response was a low growl of frustration, but his eyes were wild with the realization. "What do you suggest, Ambassador?" "We're stranded." Vethok turned, his gaze sweeping across the bridge. The fear in the eyes of his crew was palpable, like a living thing clinging to the edges of their sanity. Whatever the humans had done, it was more than a simple counterattack. They had turned the tables. "They are not attacking us in the way we expect," Vethok said slowly. "They are hunting us like prey." Ulker snarled, his temper flaring. "That's impossible. We are the Zorthan Empire. We are the apex of the galaxy." But even as he said it, Vethok could see the doubt in his eyes. The pride, the arrogance that had always defined the Zorthan way was beginning to crumble. For the first time, Vethok saw Ulker not as a feared leader, but as a man, a being not unlike himself, grasping at the edges of a terrifying truth. "They know exactly what we are capable of," Vethok murmured, "and they know how to destroy it." Another tremor shook the ship, and this time, the view outside the window shifted. Stars distorted, bending and warping as if reality itself were being reshaped. Vethok's breath caught in his throat. "They've done it," he whispered. "They've found a way to bend space." Ulker's eyes locked onto him with an almost frantic intensity. "What does that mean? What can we do?" Vethok's mind raced. There were no quick answers, no weapon that could fight this force. The humans were far beyond the Zorthans now. They were not just fighting with technology. They were fighting with ideas. Ideas that defied everything the galaxy had ever known. "There is nothing we can do," Vethok said, his voice shaking with a mix of awe and dread. "Not unless we can get back to Zorthan space and warn the Empire before they try to escalate this." A low hum vibrated through the ship, and then a voice crackled again over the comms. Human, calm, yet laced with an undeniable force. "You were warned. It was the same voice from before, the one that had mocked them after the flagship had disappeared. But now, it was different, more direct, more in control. Vethok felt his stomach drop. What do they want? Ulker's eyes burned with a mixture of rage and fear. This is a test, a declaration of war. But they won't win. We can't fight this, strategist. Vethok's voice was firm now, no longer filled with the uncertainty that had plagued him before. The only way we survive is if we retreat. We need to warn the Empire. If we don't, Earth will wipe us out before we can even begin to understand how they did this. Ulker clenched his fists, his knuckles white. Retreat? We are not cowards, Ambassador. We fight to the death. Vethok met his gaze, his voice unwavering. Then you will die. For the first time, Ulker hesitated. The pride, the arrogance, the belief that the Zorthan Empire could never be defeated. He saw it all slipping away, shattered by the reality of the situation. Vethok knew that the Zorthans had not yet accepted the truth. They were no longer the apex of the galaxy. They were no longer the ones to strike fear into the hearts of all who encountered them. They had made a grave mistake in underestimating humanity. And now, humanity was showing them just how dangerous it could be. The Zorthan ship continued to shake, systems failing faster than they could repair them. Every moment, they lost more control. And as the bridge crew scrambled to hold the ship together, a final, chilling message echoed through the comms. Retreat if you value your lives. If you stay, you will be erased. Vethok turned to Ulker one last time. It's over. Ulker's face twisted in fury. Then I will make them pay for this humiliation. But Vethok could only watch as the reality of the situation settled in. The humans had already won. The Zorthan flagship, in its desperate flight, continued to tremble, the once proud vessel now struggling against forces it could not comprehend. The stars outside no longer shone with the clarity of the void but twisted, shifting, as though the very fabric of space was buckling under the weight of an unimaginable power. The Zorthan officers, who had once been the finest in the galaxy, now worked in frantic silence, knowing that their fate was sealed. They were no longer warriors. They were refugees, running from a force that they could not understand or overcome. Ulker stood at the front of the bridge, his claws digging into the command console. His thoughts churned, a mix of rage, disbelief, and a burning desire for vengeance. He had led the Zorthan Empire with arrogance, believing that no force in the galaxy could stand against them. Yet here he was, fleeing from humans. The thought was unbearable. Can we get the engines online? Ulker barked, his voice raw with frustration. One of the officers, a young Zorthan, looked up with wide, terrified eyes. I can't, sir. The systems. They're being jammed. Whatever they did, they've completely disabled our propulsion. The hum of the ship's failing systems seemed to grow louder, the once steady thrum of the engines replaced by a faint, stuttering pulse, like the heartbeat of a dying creature. Vethok had warned them. He had tried to explain what the humans were capable of, but Ulker had dismissed him. Now it was too late. They're out there, Vethok said quietly, his voice laced with the finality of someone who had accepted the inevitable. His eyes were fixed on the stars outside the viewports, as if searching for something, anything that could give him hope. But there was nothing. The humans had them trapped in a web of unknown technology. We are helpless. Ulker spun on him, his rage blinding him. What do you mean, we're helpless? You said they were weak. You said they couldn't. I was wrong. Vethok interrupted, his tone cold and certain. I didn't know what they were capable of. I didn't understand until now. The weight of those words hung in the air. Ulker's claws curled into fists, his body trembling with anger and humiliation. He had led them to this point. He had underestimated the humans, and now his pride and arrogance were the very things that would cost them their lives. Another tremor shot through the ship, harder than the last. It felt as if the very hull of the vessel was being crushed from all sides. The lights flickered, then went out, plunging the bridge into darkness for a heartbeat before emergency lights flickered back on. "Damage report," Ulcor roared. "We're losing structural integrity," came the response, weak and strained. "Shields are offline. We've lost communication with the rest of the fleet." Vethok looked at Ulcor, his expression somber. "It's over, strategist. There is no escape." Ulcor's jaw tightened, his mind racing with every possible countermeasure, but every thought seemed futile. The realization began to settle over him like a cold shroud. There was no hope left. The humans had already won. He gripped the edge of the command console, his mind desperate for any strategy, any last-ditch effort to turn the tide. But the humans had already anticipated this. They had outsmarted them at every turn. "Why didn't we listen?" Ulcor whispered under his breath, the anger in his voice gone, replaced by a sickening sense of regret. Vethok's voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of someone who had come to terms with the truth. "Because you believed in the Empire, you believed in power, and you thought nothing could threaten that." He shook his head. "But the truth is, power doesn't always win." The officer at the communications console suddenly straightened, his face filled with shock. "Sir, we've received a transmission." Ulcor's eyes narrowed. "From who?" The officer hesitated before responding. It's a human ship." The bridge fell silent as the transmission came through, the voice calm, almost disinterested, as if the speaker already knew the outcome. "You should have listened to your ambassador," the voice said, its tone eerily casual. "Now you will learn what happens when you provoke humanity." The message cut off abruptly, leaving nothing but static in its wake. The silence in the room stretched out like a taut wire, vibrating with the weight of impending doom. Vethok felt his stomach twist, his earlier warning now all too real. The humans had played them for fools, and now they would make them pay. Another flash of light, another shudder of the ship. This time, it was accompanied by the sickening sound of tearing metal, followed by a sudden violent jolt that threw everyone on the bridge to the floor. The walls buckled inward, as if some invisible force were crushing the ship from the outside. Ulcor, sprawled on the floor, looked up with wide eyes, his face contorted in disbelief. No, this can't be." The entire flagship shook again, and with a terrible, grinding sound, the ship began to break apart. Panels exploded. The once mighty Zorthan flagship continued to lurch and flicker, its systems rapidly failing, as if something invisible was tearing it apart from the inside. The lights on the bridge dimmed, and the hum of the engines gradually died into an eerie silence. Every Zorthan officer, once so confident in their superiority, now looked around in shock and confusion. No one spoke. There was nothing left to say. They were no longer the ones in control. Vethok stood motionless, his claws tightly gripping the console. He had been an ambassador for most of his life, but never had he felt this powerless, this fragile. His entire species had been the dominant force in the galaxy for centuries, but against the humans, they were nothing more than prey. Ulcor stood beside him, his features frozen in a mask of rage. The fire in his eyes was still there, defiance, a refusal to accept the overwhelming reality. But even he knew, deep down, that they were out of their league. The humans had taken something from them, not just their ship, but their very sense of invincibility. "We cannot stay," Vethok said quietly, his voice steady but filled with a quiet urgency. "We need to retreat now, before we lose everything." Ulcor didn't answer immediately. His eyes were scanning the fading lights on the bridge, searching for any sign of hope, any signal that they might still salvage something. But deep down he knew. He knew it was over. But he wasn't ready to admit defeat, not yet. "I will not run from this," he finally growled. "We are the Zorthan Empire. We fight to the end." Vethok shook his head, his gaze turning toward the viewport once more. Out there, in the cold emptiness of space, he could feel it, the weight of something watching them. Something far more powerful than the Zorthan fleet. The humans. They were not like any species he had ever encountered. They are not here for battle, Vethok said, his voice heavy with realization. They are not here to destroy us. They are here to humiliate us. Ulker's rage boiled over, his fists slamming into the console. Enough. They will pay for this. Vethok looked at him, his eyes dark with understanding. No, strategist. You don't understand. They already won. And the only way we survive this is by acknowledging that. Before Ulker could retort, another communication crackled over the speakers. It was the same voice as before, calm and chilling in its simplicity. You have two choices, leave or perish. Ulker's lip curled into a snarl. This is a trick. They think they can intimidate us, make us bow before them. They don't understand who they're dealing with. Vethok felt his chest tighten. He had always believed in the Zorthan Empire's strength, in the superiority of his people. But the truth was clear now. They were outmatched. The humans were playing a game they had not yet even begun to understand, and the Zorthans were merely pieces in it. They understand us more than you think, Vethok said softly. And they understand how to destroy us without ever firing a shot. Another violent tremor shook the ship, this time sending the remaining officers sprawling to the floor. The lights flickered out completely, plunging the bridge into total darkness. The hum of the engines had faded to an eerie silence. The ship was dead. Vethok felt the chill of fear creeping over him, seeping into his very bones. Whatever the humans had done, it was beyond anything the Zorthans had ever faced. It wasn't just their ships, their weapons, or their technology. It was their mindset, their willingness to think beyond the battlefield, to use knowledge and tactics in ways the Zorthans had never imagined. Ulker let out a roar of frustration, slamming his fist against the wall. We will not be defeated by this, by them. Vethok turned to him, his voice firm but sympathetic. You already are, strategist. We all are. Just then, a sudden distortion rippled through the space around them, like the fabric of reality itself was being twisted. The stars outside warped again, bending in unnatural shapes. Vethok's eyes widened in disbelief. There was something invisible out there, something so powerful that it was distorting the very space they occupied. Suddenly, the comms crackled once more, the voice coming through clearer than ever. We gave you a choice, Zorthan Empire. You refused to listen. Now, you will know the price of your arrogance. The words were simple, but they carried an unmistakable weight. The Zorthans had underestimated humanity, underestimated the human will. And now, they were paying the price. The distortion outside grew larger, more intense, until the ship shook violently, throwing everyone to the ground. Vethok's heart pounded in his chest. He couldn't see what was happening, but he could feel it. The presence of something so vast and incomprehensible that it could erase them in an instant. A moment later, the view screen flickered to life, showing a single human ship. It was nothing like the enormous fleets the Zorthans had seen before. It was small, sleek, almost unremarkable in its appearance. But there was an undeniable power in the way it glided through space, as if it was the only thing that mattered. Vethok felt his breath catch in his throat. This wasn't a military vessel. It was something else, something far more dangerous. That's their ship? Ulker asked, his voice trembling. Vethok nodded slowly, the reality of their situation sinking in. Yes, that is their answer. The human ship's presence was suffocating, like a weight pressing down on the Zorthan ship. It was as if the entire galaxy itself had shifted, and all that remained was the undeniable fact that the humans had complete control over the situation. Do you see now? Vethok said, his voice filled with quiet awe and dread. This is what happens when you push humanity too far. The voice came through again, calm but final. Your time is up, Zorthan Empire. Prepare to face the consequences of your actions. And with that, the Zorthan flagship, once a symbol of their empire's might, was ripped from existence, leaving only an empty void where it had once been. The silence that followed was deafening, the kind that presses against your ears and suffocates the soul. The Zorthan flagship, once a towering symbol of their empire's unmatched might, was no more. Not a single scrap of debris remained, just the cold emptiness of space, vast and unforgiving. Vethok stood in the darkness of the bridge, the holographic interface flickering weakly before finally going dark. His claws, once sharp with the confidence of a ruler, now felt heavy and useless. His entire existence, his species' very foundation, had been shattered in mere moments. The hum of the ship's systems, the familiar vibrations of power coursing through its metal frame was gone. There was no more sound, no more sensation. Only the chilling awareness of utter defeat. Ulker's voice broke the silence, low and guttural. How? How is this possible? Vethok didn't answer at first. He didn't have an answer. There was no explanation for what had just happened. Their entire fleet, every strategy, every advantage they had relied on, nothing mattered. They had faced enemies before, but none like this. None who could strike from the shadows, invisible, untraceable. They had thought their weapons were supreme, their ships invincible, and their military invulnerable. But the humans had proved otherwise. It was not a battle, Vethok murmured, more to himself than to Ulker. It was a lesson. The human ship, the one that had appeared out of nowhere, as if materializing from the very fabric of space, was still out there, its presence overwhelming. Even though it remained at a distance, its effect on them was undeniable. It was not just a weapon. It was a statement, a promise, a power that demanded respect without uttering a single word. "We have to warn the others," Ulker said, his tone rising in anger, though it was clear that his spirit had been broken. "This cannot stand. We need to rally the rest of the fleet. We cannot let them walk all over us like this." Vethok turned slowly, his gaze locked on the empty space beyond the viewport. He knew the truth, and he didn't want to admit it, but there was no denying it now. The Zorthan Empire was no longer the unchallenged force in the galaxy. They were prey, and the humans were the hunters. "No, Ulker, it is over. They already know. They already control everything. All the fleets in the galaxy won't be enough to stop them. You cannot win against what you cannot see, what you cannot understand." Ulker's chest heaved, a snarl escaping his lips. "I refuse to believe it. I will not accept this defeat." Vethok shook his head. "It's not about acceptance. It's about survival. And we—" He paused, struggling to find the words. "We may not survive this." Another voice crackled over the dead comm system, its calmness in stark contrast to the chaos within Vethok. It was the human diplomat, the one who had first issued the ultimatum. "We gave you a chance," the voice said, each word resonating with authority, as if it carried the weight of the entire universe. "You chose arrogance. Now you will know the consequences." Vethok's breath caught in his throat. The words were simple, but they were pregnant with a meaning that neither he nor his people could comprehend. The humans hadn't just defeated them. They had stripped away the very essence of their power. The Zorthan Empire was no longer the apex predator of the galaxy. "Are we supposed to just surrender?" Ulker spat, his fists clenched in fury. "Give up everything we fought for?" "There is no fighting this, Ulker," Vethok replied, his voice soft but firm. "They have proven that. We don't have the luxury of choice anymore. What we can do, what we must do, is survive this." Suddenly, the comm system crackled once more, but this time it was not the human voice. It was something else. A low hum, followed by the distinct, oppressive pressure of something massive, something beyond the comprehension of the Zorthans. Vethok's eyes widened as a new image appeared on the view screen. A shape, a form. The human ship was now close enough to see its true size, and it was impossible. Its sleek, unassuming exterior belied the sheer scale of its power. It was no longer just a ship. It was a force, something so potent that it bent space itself, as if the galaxy itself was in its grip. "We are not your enemies," the human diplomat's voice came again, this time softer, almost regretful. "But we will not allow you to continue your path of destruction. Your species, your empire, it's over." The realization hit Vethok like a physical blow. He had spent his entire life serving the Zorthan Empire, believing in its invincibility. He had led campaigns, negotiated treaties, and commanded fleets. But now, standing before this undeniable truth, he felt small. The universe had shifted. The humans weren't interested in conquering or fighting. They had no need to wipe out entire civilizations. No, they were something more terrifying. They had taken everything from the Zorthans, not with violence, but with knowledge, with strategy, with understanding. Vethok could no longer ignore it. The Zorthans were irrelevant in this new reality. He looked to Ulker, whose chest was still heaving with futile defiance, and knew there was nothing left to fight for. The only thing that mattered now was whether they would leave with what little dignity remained or face total annihilation. And as he met Ulker's gaze, Vethok knew what needed to be done. It was time to lay down their weapons, to surrender to the inevitable, to let the humans show them mercy. But deep down, he knew the galaxy would never be the same again. And neither would the Zorthans. The voice from the human ship echoed once more, cold and unwavering. "Your time is over. The galaxy is ours now." And with that, the final threads of the Zorthan Empire were cut away, drifting into the abyss of the cosmos, never to be seen again.